So some of these language things need to be developed in order to, bring the two regions closer to each other. These are, looks sort of, very ordinary issues, but these are the ones which develop the conviviality and the bond that is important in the development of two regions. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ghoshal. I think in your presentation you have brought out several very important points. You touched upon China, China's trade and investment with Southeast Asia. You mentioned strangulation. I suppose there is interdependence as well as a feeling that China is too dominant economically with these countries. You also came up with a number of very important and interesting ideas, be it civilizational linkages, our lack of knowledge about each other, our question of perception about each other, Buddhist circuit, language studies, lack of institutions in India to study ASEAN and Southeast Asia. All these are absolutely relevant, necessary, and we have been all talking about it for a long time, but unfortunately, not much progress has taken. Maybe this is the occasion now, when we are celebrating 25th anniversary, India comes up with an announcement of a new institute, full-fledged institute for political, security and economic studies on the lines of Institute of Southeast Asian Studies in Singapore. Something like this, or ISAS in Singapore. It could be a good thought. Similarly, language studies. I know in JNU, Bhasa is taught, but if I am not mistaken, over the years, the number of professors and scholars and students learning Bhasa and other Southeast Asian languages has gone down, which is really very ironical when we are really talking of our strategic partnership and growing interest. So I think these are the really nuts and bolts of relationship which need to be addressed. And those who are concerned with these, including the Ministry of External Affairs and also intergovernmental bodies, you are right, not just intergovernmental, but it has to be done at all private level. Thank you very much. Our speaker in the last speaker in this session is Professor Dew Duc Din. He is a senior research fellow and former Director General, Vietnam Academy of Social Sciences, Hanoi. You heard, Professor, just now the views of our earlier speakers, the kind of respect we hold your country in, and therefore we are looking forward to hearing your presentation. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, panelists and participants. I prepare some PowerPoint, so I will talk basing on these points. The topic I speak about is about economic relations. You see that so far India and ASEAN economic relations increasing quickly in recent years. The trade is increasing from 7 billion in 2000 and 2001 to 65 billion last year. So every year it increased about 8 to 9%. So it's growing fast. So this is one of the area I think that may come quickly, faster than some other areas. And ASEAN percentage in the India trade is now over 10%. So it is a significant part in the development of Indian trade. However, the deficits from India is increasing also. It already increased 3 times from in 10 years. And here you see that the top trade partners in the ASEAN is Singapore and Indonesia. The main exports, I found that the from India to ASEAN countries, including the gold, stones, cotton, textile, manufacturers like machine, transportation, electronics, electrics, and oil, fishery, vegetable, rice, pharmaceutical, chemicals. And the main imports from ASEAN to India is like resin, plastics, natural rubber, wood products, electronic metal, organic chemicals, coal and fertilizer. FDI from ASEAN to India also increased. You see that from 2011, it increased from 23 billion to 36 billion, over 10% of the total Indian FDI from different countries in the world. And the important areas include service, telecommunication and construction, oil and gas, hard and software. And again, you can see that Singapore is still big, and Malaysia in the FDI. FDI from India to ASEAN, however, is smaller. It increased from about 500 million to 1.5 billion. And the main areas in energy, irrigation, railway. And the partners coming like several Mekong countries. And among ASEAN, Vietnam is one of the country that Indian also pay attention to. That's why the trade between the two countries also increased. You see that it was just about 50 million, and it comes up to nearly $8 billion. So it's among ASEAN countries, it's not very high. Vietnam ranked about 5th. But the increase is, the growth is increased quickly. The balance of trade has been changed. Before 1994, India was surplus. But after that, India turned to be deficit in trade with Vietnam. The main exports from India to Vietnam increased from over 40 million to over 2.5 billion, and main exports still skin products, agricultural chemicals, plastics, and soft and hardware. Imports from Vietnam to India also increased from $29 million to over $5 billion. And the FDI between the two countries is still small, but also increased. Up to now, India invests about $500 million in Vietnam, mainly in the agriculture, industries, oil and gas. And FDI from Vietnam to India is very small, just 26 million in 2016, mainly in software service, husbandry, food. From this, I find that there are some factors that contribute to the growth of the economic relations between India and ASEAN countries. The first is that the high growth of the economies of India and some of the economies in ASEAN is very good for the development of cooperation between the two countries. And you see that up to now, India is one of the fastest growth economy with over 7% growth rate a year. So that's one of the points that we think that contribute to the growth of economic relations between the ASEAN economies and India. The complementation of the two countries also help that some economic sectors in ASEAN need India, and some sectors in India need ASEAN countries. So that's the complementation also. The second point is you have talked and discussed a lot about the looking east and acting east policies. India is giving high priority for the partnership with ASEAN countries. So this is one of the policy direction that contribute to the growth of economic relations. The different agreements also help. One of the important agreement is the Indian-ASEAN free trade areas. This help reduce a lot of, over 90% of the trade taxes. And the reduction of taxes trade rates help a lot for the increase of trade and investment. And along with economic cooperations, the cooperation in other areas like tourism, culture, education, science and technologies in recent years, including security, defense, ocean. These areas also contribute to the growth of the economic relations. However, between the two countries, India and ASEAN countries, there are still some difference and constraints. The first, you may see that India is one economy, but ASEAN is 10 economies. Even ASEAN has one of the most important principles is the consensus because of the differences. So if we develop the economies in ASEAN with India, it takes different policies, different ways with different countries. Of course, the free trade area is one of the points, but different economies still have different ways of cooperation. If you look at these economies, you see that it seems that the ASEAN economies are more open and more integrated than Indian economy. Indian economy started its reduction of constraints since the reform in 1991. But many ASEAN countries have reduced the tax rates, the management constraints long ago. Of course, we come from Vietnam, it has been changed. At least we have 30 years of renovation since 1986. However, still there are some difference, and it seems, according to me, that the ASEAN economies are more open and integrated. The second point I mentioned here is some of the policies consideration. ASEAN economies are freer to import materials and capital, but India has a long history from the 50s of using local capital and local materials. And now, with the reform, they change. But the change is still not yet freer like ASEAN economies. And after the reform, India has removed a lot of taxes, but the rates of many taxes are still higher than ASEAN economies. Not yet to mention about the management system that in ASEAN seems more effective, while in India sometimes it takes time, more time than several ASEAN countries like Singapore, Indonesia, or Malaysia, or Thailand. So the difference and the constraints here need to be removed so that the two economies, or one economy and the other group of economies could develop better cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Du, for sharing your views again very candidly. I think you have given us a very good picture of the ASEAN-India trade as well as the India-Vietnam trade, because, somehow we all look upon Vietnam as a fairly successful country in the last couple of decades in terms of promoting its exports. I think be it rice, be it coffee, be it garments, the Vietnam performance has been really quite impressive. So what India can do with this regard, whether we can promote our own trade of these goods, taking the advantage of our cooperation with Vietnam. I think the differences which you mentioned are also valid, and we need to again introspect whether your economies are more integrated, they are freer economies, whether tax rates. These are matters for our expert group to sit together, and I think government and the private sector, the industry, will have to really address these issues. Otherwise, our trade of some $70 billion, it may sound large as compared to what it was in 2001, but it is really nothing as compared to what Professor Ghoshal said, 1/5 of that of China. And I think this is something which we'll have to constantly keep in mind. So, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we are